what do we want to open with?
Yeah, let's get a read of the room. Do you guys think we should start with the things that made it onto the show, or should we start with the characters from the books? Just general read. No one is gonna say books. Okay. Easy. So I think one of the interesting things to me about the representation in the books, specifically of gay relationships, is that there are sapphic relationships we see them on text between Dany, and we see them with Cersei, and he writes them as their POV, but we don't see them from the male perspective because he doesn't want to write it, and so that's its own issue. And when we see these female relationships, they have some issues. I think you guys might agree. Yeah. I think we could all agree that there are issues, but I think, for example, Cersei and Taena is very different than Daenerys. The way that he wrote that, and so I can appreciate that there is some nuance there. Pass it over. You're just still sitting. Okay.
Yeah.
You need Nami. I just don't want to monopolize this conversation. But I don't know. What about Ashley? Do you have any gay characters in the series that you particularly like or were excited by? Anything like that at all?
Well, I really liked Renly and Loras because it's not in your face. You don't always catch on to it at first. And I like that it's, like you were saying, with the women are very sexualized. This one is very much a romantic relationship, and you really see that with Loras after Renly dies, and show. I just, they're my favorite.
Okay, yeah, so they're your favorite. Whereas I really would have liked to see more of that, be more, to be in the text more, I suppose. He did it so subtly that a lot of people really didn't catch on. So I'm less of a fan of it not being shown, but that neither of them are POVs.
Right.
So, there's some subtle ones he throws in there too. One of my favorites is Nymeria Sand with the Fowler twins, right? You hear she's in bed with the Fowler twins, and you're like, what's this about? And then later you find out, their names are Jane and Gentleman, and maybe you can say they're just how women they sleep with other women in bed together. But you can read into it whatever you want. That's the great thing about it.
They're just gals being pals, right?
Gals being pals. Yeah. Think about that Facebook group now, the tag group, just gals being pals. Okay.
We get a lot of that in Dorne, obviously, too, because even Arianne Martell, she talks about her and Tyene Sand, who's her cousin, but they fool around a little bit. They kiss with each other, it isn't. But even there, when she's talking about it, George isn't in that mindset. You don't feel that Arianne actually is really attracted to women, despite having messed around with Tyene.
I feel like it's a whole thing about validation for sapphic relationships. I feel like that it's seen as a phase with a lot of, especially with male writers, and even on the show, it's seen as a phase almost. There's nothing really strong about it. It's just kind of gals being pals. But I think that because it's objectified, as for example, I know we said we were going to do the show, but you have the Horace and Littlefinger's brothel, and they're teaching them how to have sex with women, but it's only for the male eye. It's only for the male gaze. It's not actually a fulfilling relationship. It's just an excuse to have more tits and ass on the TV.
Yeah, and you see that in, for example, as you compare the books and the show with Daenerys and Irri. Obviously, in the show it was Dorea, but in the books, this is very much Daenerys goes back to Irri later on for comfort. They sleep together again, and Daenerys, it just doesn't do anything for her in that moment, not because she isn't necessarily attracted to her, but because she's kind of lovelorn still over Drogo, and she's just not in that headspace. But even then, there's not anything in there in the text where Daenerys never notices, wow, so-and-so is quite beautiful, or she doesn't think that way, despite clearly you know, she's not just straight.
Well, I think that she's probably more like hetero-flexible. I don't think that she's romantically attracted to women at all. I've never gotten that vibe. But she's willing to experiment other ways.
Yeah, that makes sense. And let's see here. Sticking with the female characters, one relationship that we don't see at all in the show, which I think is really interesting that we didn't, is Cersei and Taena of Myr. They didn't put that character in there. They didn't put that scene in there. It's not a scene I love, but like, it is a really important scene, I think, that shows a lot about Cersei taking control of her sexuality, and she's trying to put herself in the man's role, and she's really, experimenting herself with that sort of thing. And I was surprised they didn't have it in there. I think that it fits perfectly with Game of Thrones.
It's probably a contract thing.
Oh yeah,
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Plus, Cersei's a bit older in the show too.
Yeah, that's also true.
Cause like I will admit this in front of a room full of people. I actually have not finished the books. But
Where are you at, Becca?
Don't.
Oh, no.
So I'm past Daenerys' wedding, but I had a thing that came up and it's affected my ability to like read and comprehend. So that's the reason I finished the book. But no, I understand. Like I know a bit about the Taena Cersei dynamic. It's almost like I don't want to say BDSM type situation, but I mean, from what I understand, it's definitely Cersei.
She's dominating. Like she's in the role of power.
Yeah.
Very much about that.
Everybody in here is like, ooh.
And plus, Taena's like gorgeous.
Yeah.
Jack described. I mean, anyways, just throwing that out there. I was very disappointed. But we did get, just to give the show credit, we do see, Yara Asha, like they made her pansexual in the show.
Oh yeah.
That's a
We
good
stand
thing.
that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And obviously with we see her
Yeah,
with Ilaria.
yeah.
So that was good. That was a good thing.
Sorry, I'm not giggling at y'all. I'm laughing at.
I think y'all have some questions back there.
Yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to say a really interesting element of Cersei's relationship with Taena is the level at which it also functions as a reclamation of her rape at the hands of Robert, because she's actively thinking about that during one of those experiences. So it's not just an expression, potentially an expression of her own attraction or sexuality, is also a way that she's processing her trauma and trying to like reclaim and heal from her own trauma at the hands of Robert, which I think just adds like a whole other layer of like kind of fucked up but also really interesting, because she's attempting to like find healing from something that was really traumatic at the hands of a man in a patriarchal society, and like as a queer woman, like potentially as a queer character, trying to reclaim that through a relationship with another woman is just like a really interesting and cool thing. And I'm not entirely certain that Martin meant all of that, but as someone who is a queer woman, like being able to like read that and see that is like a really just fascinating and really powerful story to tell, that I think not a lot of people pay enough attention to, like all of what that means for Cersei in that moment to be interacting with Taena in that way.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Cersei thinks about, if she had been born a man, and this is also her grappling with with that idea as well. Like, I do think that there is an element of Cersei, dealing with her status as a woman, which is why what happened to her with Robert happened, is because of that. And so like if she had this power, she would be the one doing it potentially, and she's experiencing that. Let's see. I still keep hoping Nami will show up before we get too deep in.
I've killed my brain for the weekend.
It's okay. It's okay.
But, with Cersei, I think it's also like, because she's not a feminist. She wants to be a man. It's kind of what her thing is. So, where's my idea going? opposite. I'm
I
sorry.
mean, that's a good thought right there. I mean, that is what it is. Like, she isn't a feminist.
Yeah, it's her wanting to do to others what Robert did to her. That's how she kind of processes to
Yeah.
be
She looks down on other women a lot too.
Yeah,
Like,
she does.
She's a horrible misogynist.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to think. You mentioned how they could do like Tana and Cersei in the TV show,
Yeah.
like well.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, she doesn't have many female characters around her except for Bernadette, her handmaiden, who
Oh,
like
yes.
dresses like her. and
Yes.
has to be-
Yes. Yes.
We actually just had a conversation
And had the
about
short
this
hair,
recently.
too.
Yeah.
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 She's trying.
Yeah.
But also, like, if we're talking about women characters on the show and in the books, and like whether or not they're feminists, I feel like it's almost not even as important a point when you have all these men who get to make like strong narrative decisions and stuff like that. Women can be just as terrible, and there's a lot of, at least more of the women in the books that are POV characters and important are like almost purity fetish levels of like
Yes.
Yeah.
being good, and it's almost refreshing to have a woman who's allowed to be terrible. That's why
Yeah.
Cersei's chapters are so compelling, and like she can be just as like realistically bad as like
Yeah.
Robert and Tyrion and so many of the other characters.
And I completely agree with that, but in terms of seeing these relationships on the page, you want more parity there, you know, like which is why I bring up the Daenerys and Eerie scene, because I think that is a good counterpoint to show that that was a more functional
Yeah.
relationship, you know, whatever experience, whatever you want to call it, that they had. So at least he did two,
I mean,
you know, one
slightly
good
more
and one bad.
Slightly more functional, but it's still like there's still a consent issue there that's really just kind of iffy because Yuri is her handmaiden, and no matter what, she's going to feel compelled by the power that Daenerys has to
That's a
engage
great
in that
point.
sexual situation with her.
Yes.
Hi.
Here.
This bitch late. She couldn't find it.
But you look amazing.
Thank you. Look, keep an eye out tonight for literally a whole bunch of nerds dressed as punny DC versions of characters. So I am Marjorie, the Poison Ivy. Yeah. Hi, my name is Nami. My pronouns are female pronouns. I am bisexual, and I have not come out to my family because of a series of unfortunate events in which when I was incredibly depressed, my mother asked me if I was bi, and I screamed no really loudly, and I don't know how to take that back now.
It's okay. My parents think my bisexuality is a phase.
My mother very
And now it's unrecorded, so.
My mother very specifically asked me, "Oh my God, are you depressed because you're secretly a lesbian?" And I'm like, "No." And then it was too late. She also later asked me, because my ex's name was Alex, and we watched Supergirl together. And as you know, Alex is the name of Supergirl's sister, and she is a lesbian on the show. And my mom goes, "Wait a second, when you keep telling me that you like Alex, is the code for you like Alex as in on Supergirl, as in you're gay?" I'm like,
Oh yeah.
I feel like she might already know.
Just roll with it. It's
Reasonable, honestly.
So to catch you up, we've been talking a bit about Cersei and Tana, and about Daenerys and Eerie. We've talked a bit about Renly and Loras.
Okay.
And that's really the meat of what we've talked about so far.
Okay,
So you're pretty caught up. So if you have any thoughts on those relationships,
I mean, I just, whenever, I've been so knee deep in the musical that now whenever I think of Renly Loras, all I can think of is Loras hugging Marjorie and being like, "Well, if you really love me, you'd share him." And yeah, I think the main thing that I actually wanted to talk about was how Ilaria Sand is like very strongly suggested to be bisexual, and I know they never really come out and say it because she is like technically mainly with Oberyn, but I think that there's like very interesting dynamics there with how her bisexuality is left open, and also the fact that they kind of seem to be a like polyamorous couple and not just swingers. And I think that's a really cool.
I think
little detail.
we did have a question from the dragon leaning back in her chair.
No, yeah, I was just going to bring up. I was wondering how you guys felt about both Oberyn and Ilaria as possibly bisexual and also polyamorous representation in the books
We
and
were
also
just talking about, so.
Yeah, no, I super love it because I'm not poly, but I do have a lot of friends who are, and they're always talking about how there is very little representation of healthy polyamory in television, and when polyamory is presented, it's presented very jokingly and not in a healthy way. I think that one of the most recent examples is in Letterkenny. The McMurrays are polyamorous, and they have a pool party where they're trying to hit on everybody there in the hot tub, and it's presented as very awkward. And it's funny, but it's not good representation. And you know, I think that's what we're always trying to go for. And I think I love Dorne a lot as just a concept and as a place. And I think the representation of Dorne and of Oberyn and Hilaria especially is really good. And surprisingly, it's one of the few things that the show actually pulls off well.
Yeah, I think so, especially because we were talking about this as well earlier. We touched on Ilaria and Yara Asha, and how that was one of the few things that the show really we were pumped for.
And I think it was really great that even though that whole time I was like very angry because like once again Dorne was being useless, I was just very happy that they finally like took the step to say yes, she is bisexual without being like, hey, my name is Ilaria, I identify as bi, and like, you know, legitimately doing that whole like sit in a circle intro.
And on the subject of like representations of polyamory, we have a bunch of representations in A Song of Ice and Fire, but except for Dorne, for the most part, they are, pretty negative representations. They're like the Ironborn, or, people with just multiple wives, Targaryens.
And I think the other thing is that, a very important, I think, polyamorous triad that comes up a lot is Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys. And I think one thing that comes off with that very disappointing really is how it's like, oh, Rhaenys is obviously his favorite, he has like no connection with Visenya, like Rhaenys and Visenya don't really seem to have much of a connection, but I was gonna say, this seems like the moment that I should like check out my like two biggest Rhaenys and Visenya stands here. Yeah. For their insight.
It's because Visenya's a lesbian.
We will accept this.
I think that might just be it.
There you go.
Yeah, sure.
You mentioned Ilaria and Oberyn. Do you want to talk about Oberyn a little bit? I find him to be a very interesting character.
Sure.
I mean, on a lot of levels.
Yeah, because obviously Oberyn has talked about how Daemon Sand was his lover, as well. And so we knew Oberyn was bi, but you see Daemon Sand, and he's been with Arianne as well. And so that's very interesting. But it's also another one of those power dynamic things where like that was his squire, he's much younger, but that's representing a real thing, not the squire part, but a real thing, that happened.
You don't have a squire?
I had one last year when I had my armor, but not this year.
What I particularly like is how positively the way that he's got a lot of swagger and he's very confident, but he's so open-minded, almost like, you're not attracted to both, like you're missing, like, what are you
thinking?
It's a very forward-leaning kind of like,
exactly.
It's something that you could look at and be like, yeah, that guy's badass, dude.
Yeah, it's also one of those things that, for me personally, a large part of being comfortable with bisexuality was Oberyn's viewpoint on it, essentially, like how he's like, well, it doesn't make sense to love only based on gender.
Exactly.
And like that was just like really, really cool, and it really like spoke to me within the novels that this character like.
I like how laid back it is. It's just like, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just to echo kind of what David said in this conversation. Just I read about read the books a long time ago, back when I had a much less developed idea of a lot of these notions. And what David's saying is true from like a straight white male perspective. Having a guy who is cool have these attitudes is kind of a good bridge for some people who might not.
Yeah, it can make you think. Yeah.
And I think it's really awesome as well because I actually kind of want to jump back to Loras and Renly for a second.
Yeah.
Because even though both are like very much portrayed as pretty men, they are like Loras is still a knight and like literally the best one. And like he's literally the best knight, and he is also a lady killer, and like he's presented as like a very handsome, very capable, very manly man.
It's not a stereotypical what you see in a sitcom.
Exactly.
Like the gay best friend. Like
that's not
who he is.
Yeah. In the show, that is more of what he is.
Oh yeah, in the show he is definitely Sansa's gay best friend that could have been, and I
Same
still
applies
wish
to Jon Con.
What?
I mean, like Jon Con.
Yeah.
Like you do, like
No.
you does not present as like as none of the gay male characters in
No.
games as present as stereotypically gay male characters.
Yeah,
The
and I
way
think
that
that's
most of
really
society portrays them.
amazing because I know for a lot of people like reading the books, like that might not be why you get into it, but if you are like questioning your sexuality, it's kind of like a reassurance in a sense that like, yeah, no, this is cool, this is fine.
And they don't feel like characters that were like stuck in there to be the gay person.
Right.
Exactly.
They're characters who just happen to be gay, which is what we're supposed to do. Like he talks about women, like, well, some people are women, and I like writing people.
Yeah.
Some people are gay.
Exactly.
Or bisexual.
They're not fetishized.
I feel like in Fire and Blood, George does an even better version of writing gay characters where it's just matter of fact. And he uses the concept of women having favorites,
Yes.
which like also shout out to the movie The Favorite.
Yeah.
Rhaena Targaryen, Allie Blackwood, Sabbath Frey. A lot of women are just written. As
Now we've got like
oh,
Sarah Targaryen and all of her friends. We probably get almost 10 like women who are gay.
And they're not
Gal
like
pals.
awful. They're just some of them are really good. Some of them are like not so good. It's like wow, they can just be gay. It doesn't have to be like a big ass thing where they're like witch hunted
Or a
for it.
personality trait.
I feel like that was also George evolving because
Yes.
he took the feedback from the first few books and was like, okay, you know, we can't be.
I was talking. Go ahead.
Yeah, I feel like that because Fire and not Fire, but World of Ice and Fire started dropping hints to I think it was Rhaena Targaryen, Seventh the Viper, and that like there are just that obviously real people exist. I think maybe I don't know how much the editors and the people who worked on that with him maybe started influencing that, so when Fire and Blood happened, he kind of threw more in, or it's just he's realizing his audience has.
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure he gets feedback from people. He knows when he can't avoid it. So if he hears people just constantly criticizing him on certain things, he might start to think about it a little bit more. And we see an improvement in Fire and Blood. And so obviously I'm excited for the Winds of Winter, but I'm particularly excited to see how he improves on things if he does something more there.
Yeah, I'm actually really interested to see if, well, yes, I mean, let's be real. Before Dany, like, literally murders everyone, Sansa's gonna realize she likes girls. It's gonna be great. Also, this is kind of more of a joke than anything, but I would like to point out that when Arya, like, rolled over in Net last week, she had the look of somebody who just realized she likes girls. Like,
yes, let me tell you, when I saw that scene, I was like, she does not look very happy or satisfied, or what's going on
I
here?
recognized this on my own face before.
And then someone pointed out the lyrics for Jenny's song when it went on, the lyrics that were on the screen right there, that he never wanted to leave their side. I was like, okay, they're trying to make it that she's sad, that she thinks she's gonna die. Okay, whatever, but you can believe what you want.
I think my interpretation is a little more interesting.
Yeah, and like maybe just go with what you want. That's what I like
All
about
the ghosts are gay. All the ghosts are gay. Okay.
And so we were talking about Sansa and Daenerys, and so obviously before she was interacting with Daenerys, people had long shipped her with Marjorie.
Yeah.
Which I've always been into, but that's also, some people aren't very into it because Marjorie manipulates Marjorie and her family, they do. And so that's something I just, in terms of us talking about, like we can't have this panel and not talk about two of the most popular Sansa ships. And so worth mentioning, I wanted to get your opinion, if that gives you any pause. And at this point, it's a moot point, like, she's just not around Marjorie.
Yeah, I mean, it was just like, there was, I don't know, I guess speaking from the show, because once again, I'm shunned from, because I haven't read the books all the way through. But no, like, and I definitely, the Sansa was strong for me, but also, I also have other problematic ships that I won't talk about right now.
Okay, so you're all mad at that. You're like, this is nothing.
Well, no, just like, but no, I agree. I agree that there was a very much, it was kind of like Marjorie is seducing Sansa in a way, but also Marjorie and her family were very terrible to Sansa.
Yeah.
She was vulnerable, and they took advantage of that by using Marjorie.
Yeah.
And I, that's a toxic portrayal of that, because yes, the ship is nice, but you also have to look beyond and see what really was going on.
Yeah, I was definitely one of those people that hella shipped that, and I still do.
Yeah, like,
except I ship, like, you know, Marjorie not being a fireball and meeting, like, her and Sansa being like, I saw what you did, but I've grown.
I like that.
We have AUs.
I do start to wonder, like, with breathing fire and blood, and you know, the one Targaryen, I'm sorry, the names.
Are you talking about Rhaena Targaryen?
Yeah. With all her cousins and everything, I'm starting to wonder, is Marjorie maybe?
Oh, yes.
gay?
Oh, well, obviously.
So they just threw all those men, you know,
I
under
was
the
gonna
bridge, and it's
say-
actually all of the women, and they were just like, whew, that was close.
Nobody has that close of a friendship with that many female cousins, always around she's a little gay. Or maybe you do, I don't know. I don't
And I mean, they hinted at that even in the show. Like, they had that one line, you know, it's not just like, how do you know this, you know? And Marjorie's like, you know, my mother told me, whatever.
What did Tyrell treat her well?
Yeah.
I'm not saying I have that many, those cousins. Yeah, so an interesting conundrum. You guys have talked about how George started writing, how George started right now, after Fire and Blood is the most current thing we have. The setting he's given is a society that does not discuss these things openly. For the most part, that's the examples like Dorne and that. So that's an issue he has to overcome within the POVs because they have to filter it through their own vision of what's going on
discuss it
around
openly, but they also don't, you know, burn the witches. You know, they're not just prosecuting people for being gay. Like, that isn't really a thing in Westeros that they are looking, that they aren't. Like, it isn't illegal to be gay. But it isn't, like, you don't want to broadcast it.
Yeah, it's like, as long as you're producing an heir for your house.
Yeah, do what you
What does
want.
Olenna say? We don't mind a bit of discreet buggery in Dorne or something?
Yeah.
But basically, if I were to make that a question, it would be, how do you see that framing? Like, how does that, what is this, kind of what you're touching on just now, like, they don't burn people for being gay in Westeros, but what do you see the baseline as?
What I've always kind of seen.
Men can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
I kind of got that impression.
Well, there is the scene with the high septon, the high sparrow or whatever.
Yeah, I know, he's just a little more, I'm an extremist.
Yeah, and he's like, I'm punishing you for butt sex. You know, he's gonna have this whole, like, that was a really awful.
Yeah.
But no, it's very much I mean, what does Olenna say? A sword swallower.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's the other thing is that they don't have a term for it. So they have to use a bunch of, euphemisms.
Yeah.
They use a bunch of different terms, and we all know what they mean, but they don't ever say gay or homosexual. Those aren't terms they use there.
Yeah, like the euphemisms. So like, you have the maester who talks about Rhaena Targaryen. He's like, I don't like fish, but when I'm served it, I eat it. And this is an educated guy who's like, I'm aware of this, and he doesn't understand it so much, but still writing this in the history books.
Yeah, exactly. And touching on like Rhaena Targaryen, I think one of the ways that George like manages to show gay characters, and sometimes I don't love the way he does it, is that like he shows them always in pairings. Like if someone's gay, they're with if they're in a relationship with someone, that's how you know. Except for a few exceptions that we can talk about. People theorize that Blackfish is potentially, or something else. There's other theories about him as well, but there's a few characters we'll talk about that are arguable, and those are the characters that we don't see in relationships. So that is the way that he's kind of managed to make that clear. Favorites.
I just wanted to point out the character Zara's own Doxus. He is rich enough to probably have a partner, and everyone be okay with it, and it's mentioned when he proposes marriage to Dany, and Dany's like, I know which dancers you're looking at.
Yeah.
He's a case where it's kind of
very
maybe
much
not a
implied.
secret because he has servants who wear very little clothes.
Yeah, exactly. Like you would assume that he is, like, for example, him. You see Lisanne Omar, who dresses very he's an example of we don't know what his sexual orientation is, but it seems very clearly, he is genderqueer. He skirts the line there with the kind of jewelry and clothing that he wears, and so we see a little bit more. We see a couple other characters like Sweets or as some, and they're in poor situations, but we see some representation that isn't always just sexual orientation, because we do see, because it's, you know, LGBTQ plus, like we see some other stuff too there, which is interesting.
Speaking of genderqueer, I don't think that George intended for Arya to be a non-binary character.
Yeah.
But she definitely reads as a non-binary character. And so I was just wondering, like, what your thoughts are on, like, what reader interpretation, because I think that you can make a great argument for that. There are other characters that you can make arguments for or against.
I'm a fan of Chase Arya.
Yeah.
That's where I go with that.
It's genderqueer. Yeah, I'm very much a fan of asexual and genderqueer Arya. I also think that like her faceless man training as well, like portrays very much into like what society thinks of people who are genderqueer or have transitioned. And I think it was like kind of like a weird gateway to get it started, but then she has become more fleshed out as a person who actually is non-binary and isn't just putting on faces, you know?
There is a line about the God of many faces demands all of her, including her private parts. So it's like he's claiming everything.
Which is kind of like the stranger. In certain depictions, the stranger's depicted as being neither male nor female. And so you have this idea that even within the Faith of the Seven, one of the gods is genderless in some way, or exists, either transcends across the gender binary or exists outside of it, which is a really interesting thing, because then when you have characters who seem to like symbolically represent the stranger, like adds a really interesting kind of potentially gender queerness to them. Like Jon Snow is called as pretty as a maid, and a lot of time, you know, several times. Several times a character like Brienne, like it's these outside, many of the characters who exist outside of society's norms have this kind of gentle little play with gender presentation, maybe not their experience of their own gender, but at least in terms of their gender presentation. And I just find that really interesting that Martin incorporated that, not just into the characters, but into like the Faith of the Seven, and kind of, especially the character like Brienne, she's really struggling against society's norms for gender presentation and not fitting in. And I love that that's a central theme for her.
I was just gonna go back to
yeah, no, just following along from that comment, I thought it was interesting how the big prophecy, the prince who's promised that everyone's trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
The reason they can't figure it out is because they have these kind of fixed definitions of like difference. And like Damon's the only one who figures out, oh wait, maybe it's on some kind of spectrum, or maybe it's applied to dragons, it's more ambiguous than that.
So I have my hand up because you mentioned Blackfish. I started a thread on Westeros.org one time, Shay.
Yeah.
Just to start it, I was like, Blackfish is gay, you know?
Okay.
And I was like, well, maybe not. But
some people think he's asexual.
And I actually,
lots of theories.
well, so that's why I brought it up, is because people said, actually, he reads pretty well as asexual. And I thought that was very interesting, and wondered if you guys wanted to comment on that, because you mentioned asexual characters too.
Well, with that it's the way I look at it, that he's probably more leaning queer than, well, gay than ace, is just because he's so adamantly against being married, and like, I mean, he'd be the man. He doesn't, if he was married to a woman, he would not have to have sex with her, right? Like
Like Hoster asking Kat, he's like, has he married someone, some woman, like
but you know,
any
that's
woman?
What makes it interesting too, because like if he doesn't have to marry her, I mean, if he doesn't have to sleep with her, if he marries her because he's the man, say, just marry her and so he stop bugging you, and then you don't have to do anything with her. So that's why it is such a mystery, and we really can't say. And it's another one of those things where you can just go with whatever makes you happiest.
Good, a few more hands, yeah.
We also got to talk about Sorella/Aros.
Oh yeah.
Because Dorne has way less of a problem with any queer stuff in his kingdoms. So I was wondering what you guys thought about him.
Like for example, we like obviously she is undercover at the Citadel. Like, do we like, would your headcanon be that she's doing that and loving it and is into that sort of thing in general, or is it just purely like this is a means to an end? I need to go to the Citadel, and so we're seeing that. Like,
I headcanon her currently as gender fluid, and until we get further information, I think that's what I'm gonna stick with. I personally think it could be very interesting if she is like very obviously trans, that would be very cool, and that's a form of representation that we don't get as much of in Game of Thrones for obvious reasons. Because there's a lot of like fluidity in gender representation, but you don't get anyone who is clearly trans, and that would be cool. And I think that whole scenario is, I don't know, I just really like it. I just like how she's undercover and like basically she's the Manning everybody, except in my version, Amanda Bynes found out she was gender fluid.
Did you say Amanda Bynes? Yeah, she's the Manning and everyone.
She's the Manning everyone. Oh my God, it's not.
Wait, did you say Amanda Bynes?
Yes.
That's what you said? Amanda Bynes. Oh, I see what you mean. Never mind. I'm sorry. Oh wait, like is in she's the man? I'm sorry. Don't you clap sarcastically. I'm sorry. If you had said Viola versus Sebastian, I would have been like, okay. But I'm just like Amanda Bynes. When has Amanda Bynes ever done something like this?
So you know, she's just Amanda Bynes is actually Sebastian Bynes now. It's always been the case.
I don't know who any of those
You also have the Jogos Nai. In the World of Ice and Fire, the Jogos Nai, like the female warriors, if they want to be a Jatar, then they have to dress and live as men. And then they get to be one of the clan leaders.
Oh.
And the men can be moon singers, but they have to dress and live as
Yes.
men.
So we've got only, I guess if we're trying to finish by 10, right?
I mean, yeah, because that's whenever that starts and people need to. I mean, I can hang out.
So, like, if you wanted to touch on more about poly things, we have a little bit of limited time. And so one thing I wanted to bring up there, we touched on it already with Dorne and Targaryens and all that, but in Essos we do see like a number of cultures that have it.
Yeah.
And they're basically all, polygamy with men, with many wives, but I just wanted to bring this one up because it is a fun one, a notable one, where in Lang, they actually have, like the god Empress, she takes 2 husbands and has a line of daughters. And so like they have this, matrilineal line that goes the other way. So like I was fist bump for that one. So I wanted to make sure we got that one in there.
And also I think it's interesting, like I'm just gonna speak on my own because I'm from the Bible Belt. I'm from South Carolina, it's the buckle of the Bible Belt.
I'm from
Virginia.
Virginia.
Oh, yeehaw. You need your last haw. I'm sorry, I'm all memes tonight. It's only gonna get worse as I go on. But no, like my parents watch Game of Thrones, and I think it's interesting that they do not care at all about the sex or the violence. But the second that a man kisses another man or a woman kisses another woman, they're like, they're grasping their pearls, and not knowing they have a queer daughter, and my brother's also queer, so queer son. And so my brother and I are just kind of like, so I think it's really interesting too because it's brought forth a lot of, I don't know, it's still in a modern age, you still have people who are about it. That's the only way I can really describe it, and but it's. And like, of course, I think that A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones have a really nice, open-minded fan base, and like, obviously sitting here looking at all of you who have come to support the panel, that's awesome. But, it still is relatively new. Polyamory is still relatively new. People are still struggling with accepting non-binary people and also accepting with trans masc or trans femme and, like stuff like that. So I think that as long as, like, I would love to see more representation in the show because honestly, I know a lot of people are not going to read the books.
Not the way they do it. They don't handle it.
Yeah.
I'm still mad about Loras and Renly. I'm not going to.
I'm just saying, like, in general, it's bringing up more and more examples. For example, of polyamory. You really don't see polyamory that often at all, really. In shows.
Becca, you gotta watch these fans.
You gotta watch Siren.
Okay, well, I'll do it for you if you
gotta watch Black Sails.
Huh?
Yes!
Okay.
Ashaya, do you think the Wheel of Time, you're familiar with Wheel of Time, right?
I'm not a Wheel of Time fan, no.
Never mind. There's polyamory with that. The hero has like 3 female companions.
It doesn't sound like the best representation so far, but I'll
They're all really powerful and they end up sort of controlling him. So.
I don't know about that. It still sounds like just a fucked up situation. But
No, I was. They're gonna make a series about it. I just asked.
Yeah, no, they are. So yes.
Well, they may change the books to fit the audience.
Yeah, and that would make. I would assume that whatever was written a long time ago could be improved upon in that
By a person from South Carolina.
Yeah.
What?
I'm very
Robert
much.
Robert Jordan is from South Carolina. The
Yeah.
author of Real Time.
I'm very much just
sorry.
really. I think one of the reasons I'm so okay, I'm going to rephrase all of that because it sounded like I was going to start with happy, but I'm actually starting with angry. So, plot twist. So I think one of the reasons I'm so upset about why the Sand Snakes were so dumb and useless, and why Ellaria was a betraying asswife, and why she kiss murdered a child.
Kiss murder, I'm gonna use that for
Kiss
now.
murder, yeah. The highest form of murder. I would definitely do it, but like not Ellaria. But I think the reason I'm so upset about that is because Dorne is presented as one of the most LGBTQ friendly locations, and the fact that literally everybody from Dorne sucked is just very upsetting to me. And I think that's why, like, more than the fact that they are like cool characters, and I think their portrayal did them injustice, I think it also does a lot of injustice that the area of the country essentially that is the most LGBTQ friendly is presented with such useless characters.
And the most diverse otherwise, of course,
Yeah,
it goes without
exactly.
saying,
Right.
but
They're all
like
people of color, and they're all like hypersexualized.
Yeah.
Especially
Exactly.
they're all evil.
And they're all evil, yeah.
They're
like,
all
what-
evil.
Why?
Yeah,
Yeah.
once again, this is a completely different issue, but can we just stop it with the evil brown people?
In the books, it's remarked how agreeable and nice Nim and Taina are. Like, wow, they're such sweet people. You would never know that they could kill you in 2 seconds because they're agreeable and lovely human beings.
Yeah, like literally the only one who is presented as kind of being the standoffish asshole is Obara, and like.
Okay, like you're right. This
That's valid, right? And like, oh man, it was just, oh man.
Did we want to have a couple of other things to get to before we end it?
Yeah. 10 minutes? Okay. What do you guys, you guys have to document anything you guys really want to make sure we hit on here? I guess, I mean, we talked about Fire and Blood, and that's a whole huge topic of its own. But I did want to mention Black Alley Blackwood in particular because I think it's very subtle. Yeah, because I think it's very subtle. The fact that, like, you know, she's definitively is bi or pan or whatever, but she definitely, like, I mean, she had a thing with Sabbath of Viperin, who became Sabbath of Frey, and then, you know, had a thing with Cregan Stark, and like I cared about them both, and I really appreciated that little aspect of things, her character, I suppose.
I'm nodding in agreement, but I actually haven't had a chance to read Fire and
Oh,
Blood yet.
okay. Well, I'm spoiling you.
I
Oh no.
spiritually agree. You know what?
Okay, it's
I
okay.
paid
Now
this
you
song,
know.
I signed up for it.
Yes. Elena was cosplaying as Black Alley Blackwood this today, and I got to take pictures of her too.
Did you see Elle? She was Black Alley.
Oh, I didn't.
Yeah,
Oh.
we stand Black Alley here.
Yeah.
She busted open.
You need a Sabbath of Viperin though. Like you need her. Like here we go.
What does she look like? Because I will look. No. Never mind.
Sorry, I don't know where I was going. We're not plans for next year already.
I don't know. I'm like gay couple. I'll do it.
Anything that you guys want to hit on in particular?
I think my thing that I wanted to mention actually was, even though I was angry with Elaria's uselessness during the end of her time, I really liked how they had her with Asha, Yara, Asha, and I really like how they made that explicitly, like, yes, they're together, and I like how it wasn't like. Essentially,
it wasn't for a man.
It wasn't for a man, and it wasn't fetishized like Renly and Loras were a little bit in the show. I just think it was one of the, it was like a very obviously gay portrayal, and it was also like a very not
objectified.
Yes, I mean, in the sense that they're both very pretty ladies, and well, duh, but
yeah,
they're wearing clothes.
Yeah, they were.
Exactly. Yeah, they had like they were fully clothed, and that was alarming. HBO, are you okay?
They both have a lot of power and agency too, so there's not that imbalance of like a Sansa Marjorie.
Yeah, I mean, you remind me of the trope that is gay tragedy.
Yes.
There is no
yes.
happily ever after for any gay characters. I'm just curious, has that happened in the series at all?
good question.
I think all the gay people and all the
Define a happy ending.
Yeah, like really, who has a real happy ending in A Song of Ice and Fire?
Well, you
Really,
mentioned
period.
like Ilaria and Yara, and then like 2 seconds in, like both
No.
pass,
This is
and then
true.
one is.
That did very much read like the exact gay tragedy situation, just because it was so immediately after they like found each other, and so that was not great. But I don't think I saw it as much in A Song of Ice and Fire, just because literally everybody dies, nobody's having a good time.
That's fair.
So like
Straight
while
people
it,
don't have
yeah, while it does fit in the trope for sure, I just literally want one person to survive at this point. Like one, give me one.
I don't know after tomorrow. Well,
Or actually, you know what? Give me two, so we still have like human people.
Need to really
We
repopulate
have one all the way in the back.
Did you ever mention Jon Connington, which I
Touched on him briefly, very
unrequited
briefly.
love
There's a
with,
lot of people to
Rhaegar.
talk about.
I mean, that's like, I think one of the few real Asha's bisexual in the books, but Connington, I think, is the only gay character who has a point of view.
Yeah, the only one that had a, yes, I definitely agree. Yeah, Jon Connington is the only gay character that has had a point of view, and is like, I mean, it wasn't reciprocated, and he was lovelorn and miserable and unhappy, but he's lived a long time and has raised, you know, the son of his loved person.
He's lived long enough to make more regrets that are different.
Yeah.
Do we think he's in denial, or just it's the way it's written that we don't? It's not explicit.
I think he knows. I think he knows he loves him. I don't think he's in denial. Do you guys feel differently?
No, I think that's just very much. To me, he just read very like he's dead and everything's sad.
Yeah.
Like
My silver prince.
my silver pretty man. It really read like I thought he definitely knew that he was in love, because also at that point, like, it's been years, man. Like I can figure this out by now.
On the subject, I was still thinking about, you know, the really happy endings in general, let alone happy endings for gay relationships in the story. And the one that comes to mind first, I'm sure there's maybe at least one or two others, is Jane Eyre, who's, you know, the Maid of the Vale. And she had Jessamine Redford, and this is one that's very much implied, but after all this stuff about favorites and all that, in Fire and Blood, Jane Eyre, you know, the Lady of the Vale, who was a maiden and, you know, didn't marry, she had a companion, a favorite, Jessamine Redford, and she died. Jessamine died in her arms eventually, like towards the end of their life.
Age?
Like they died. I think we're like,
Whoa.
was that a happy ending? Yeah, they died in the mother house of Paris. It's sad. Like it's sad. Like that's a sad thing. But like they had a life together. Like she was ruling, and they like no one said anything. Like
I think, you know, it comes down to whoever has power.
Yeah.
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 I think that's the closest we're getting to a happy
Yeah.
ending.
That's
Ellie, you had something?
Question. Am I projecting, or is Rhaena Targaryen also presumed to be bi?
You know, I got that vibe very much so too, but I also wasn't sure how much I was like, she's just, you know, she is a tomboy, you know, like not necessarily just because you are like that doesn't mean you also like women.
Maybe she's just edgy.
Yeah, maybe she like maybe like I want to think that she is, but also I also want to think that maybe not every character that is like that has to be bi or gay. Like maybe she is just, you know, some like boyish and like active, you know?
Also on that subject, I wanted to bring up Brienne again real quick, because I think it's really important that Brienne, look at me, it's late. I think it's so important that Brienne, who is very masculine and has very masculine interests, is still somebody who is very straight. And I think that while that's not what we're talking about here, I think it's also like adjacently connected and very
it's a
important.
gender identity and society,
Exactly.
the society expectations. So.
And with Ayla, she definitely like embraces her sexuality. She's like, she's comfortable with it, you know, as we like it's explained in the text. And so the fact that we don't hear about her having any sort of favorite, but like I said, I would prefer, you know, I'm gonna say she is.
Maybe she was just Polly and put a big face.
Yeah, there we go.
There we go. That might be it.
But yeah, we have 3 minutes, so we should probably just wrap it. Good question. Anything?
Anyone just have like a burning desire to shout a name out?
I'm just curious, like, what are you looking for good representation in like Winds of Winter?
No more bearing your gaze.
We'll each go down. Each just say something you're looking for.
I'd like to see a strong female romantic relationship. haven't gotten the male version.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would like to see an obviously trans character.
Okay.
And
We
see
have an
how that works
intersex
out.
character, which
Yeah.
is different, but like that's like about we have it. Like, and I mean, brought up Lisanne Omar, who is
Mm-hmm.
you know, he's gender queer. Anyway, so like, I was just like, we've gotten those
Yeah.
two, so yes,
I think it's like the next logical step and
Yeah.
the next logical bit of
Mhm.
representation that we do need, especially with all the violence we have against trans folk.
Yeah. I would like to see, like, again, I'm with you on more women being represented there, but specifically, and I would like to see it not in a sexual or in any sort of context. I just want someone to just be into a woman and just like have a crush and just like it to be like an innocent, nice, sweet thing that isn't just like, we're having sex now, you know? I would like that.
I want Dany to meet Sansa in the book, canonically tell her she's pretty, and then turn away and blush.
That's so hard.
Is that so hard?
Just do it.
Fire and blush.
So I guess we are done. Y'all, we've got the vet at now. So thank you so much for coming out to our panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.